Hello and most welcome to 973 of the Heidegger series. We are presently in the House of Palms in the lovely Trädgårdsförening, smack middle of Gothenburg. And for every time I come here I get amazed. Isn't it incredible? We have this paradise or oasis in the middle of town. Of course, when the thing was constructed, it was not really in the middle of town. But today, it is. And it will stay in the middle of town forever and ever. And that is interesting. We cannot change that fact. To move the whole Trädgårdsförening would be impossible today. And therefore, it has to stay. And therefore, we also have this rich nature around us here. And there is even a palm tree that is as old as the palm house itself. It's from 1878. That means that it is more than 140 years old. So that's quite incredible. And remembering, I had a discussion earlier about marsupials and mammals. And do you know what a palm tree really is? Is it a plant? Is it a tree? What do you think? Could I ask Kalle here? It's not easy to know. It's actually grass. It's a piece of grass. Odd? Yes. Is it a fitting category? Well, it probably won't be a fitting category because I heard so many people when I said, look at that palm tree, and they say, no, that's grass. I see that is breaking the language game somewhere. It doesn't really make sense to point out that is not a tree. It is a tree for me. And I would say it's a tree for all people in the common sense. And I would say to say it's a piece of grass is a special forehanden use. And therefore it should stay in the forehanden specific. Maybe some dissertation in biology, probably in a biology book, if that book wasn't too general. But it's completely unnecessary, and I would also say it is, and this is a bit tougher, I would say it's a breaking of the language game. I would say it doesn't really make sense to say it's a grass. And those breaks is what Derrida tried to look into. They are correct, most things that he discovers or uncovers from some certain point of view. You can always find some book, some encyclopedia, some book of, as Heidegger would call Fachbuch. It's a book that tells you about special traits and special definitions. But they belong to that tradition, or they belong to that language game. And they have to remain there, because if you take them out of that language game, they have lost their meaning. And I don't think I exaggerate. I think Derrida would say it's absolutely wrong to say it's grass in this conversation. It was that Kalle or Henry. That would be a major faux pas. And people would not understand what I was saying. And actually, it's even worse than that. My saying doesn't have any effect. It is. So we are currently here at the Palm House in central Gothenburg, and we have a very nice guest, a patron of our YouTube channel, and it's dear Shamsi Naemi. You can turn the camera. She's here to visit us today here.
Hi.
Farnes, she is responsible for the marketplace in Hisingen, which is the main island outside Gothenburg. And she's been very helpful in the period we've been recording this. So she's presently helping Kalle with some things, and also had a lecture series in her gallery she had in Central Town. And that lecture series was very fundamental for what I'm doing now. I learned there to do these lectures. So that's all thanks to Shamsi Naemi. I will appreciate it. And I will continue a little bit just mentioning the Palm House. It is from 1878, and it was built as a copy of the Grand Glass Hall in London, built during the Victorian era. And there is, even to this day, some palms that has survived from 1878. And that's quite massive to be a palm tree, because palm trees usually do not grow to that age. It's very unusual. And we should also remember that palm tree, in a way, it is not even a tree, it's a grass. So that is in itself quite amazing. And what I'm going to talk about today is resilience. Resilience means strength. And I mentioned earlier that when they made this huge biosphere in Texas, in the USA, they put in plants, they put in vegetation, they put in microbes, they even have rodents, nutritions, springs, small lakes. There were even a weather system within this biosphere. But what they noticed after 15 to 20 years, that was that the trees start falling down. As soon as they came to a certain height, they could not withstand their own weight. And they start to wonder, what has happened? How can this happen? Because they get all the nutritions, they get all the sun they need, they didn't have any diseases, and they finally realized there was no wind within the biosphere. There were no storms, there were nothing to affect the trees. And this was the same period where people realized, in order for us to be strong as plants, as animals, as human beings, and even as larger systems like our planetary systems, we need resistance. Without resistance, we will grow weak. So even if a storm and a powerful wind can destroy the tree, it is still completely necessary. And since that time, we have come to realize that for tree to be strong and resilient, not only strong winds and storms need to be present, but also fire. There needs to be frequent fires in the woodland. Otherwise, the trees will grow to die. Other factors like flooding, excessive drought, all is necessary. All those things are part of what makes trees strong. And I would like to say the same applies to human beings. We are also the same kind of chaotic, organized system. And without force coming from outside, without wind, without anything to make our stabilizing process proceed, we grow weak and we eventually lose our health. This is what happened now in modern time. We know that any system that is not complex will show weakness. And the most famous example is the heart. When the heart becomes too regular, when the wave and the pumping of the heart is absolutely perfect, that is a clear sign of an imminent cardiac arrest. The sign is 100% sure, because the heartbeat needs to be irregular. It needs to have disturbances. And that goes for every system, not only the heart. The human being as such needs to have resistance. And one of those things I mentioned before is that in modern time, this is a modern phenomenon, we have an excess of allergies, asthma, arthrosis, and other autoimmune diseases. These autoimmune diseases did not exist in the past. They are new entities. And they are caused by we having an environment being too clean, not putting any stress on our system. Cleanliness is the start of allergy. Actually, allergy started in the early 18th century, past century, when doctors instructed their maidens and housewives, please clean the apartment. Make it as clean as you can. Scrub it. Take away all the dust. Take away all the mice. Take away all the small animals, the insects. About 20 to 30 years later, we had the first cases of people who were allergic to dust, but also to pollen. Pollen is very similar to dust. That you can't find a single one in the Amazon, any people living in the natural wilderness like Eskimos, people from Laplandia, in northern Sweden, that suffers from allergy. What causes allergy is just like the biosphere, too much cleanliness, a lack of disturbance. That's the only thing that can break a human being. Nothing else, actually. These facts have slept into medicine, and we're starting more and more realizing that medication and the treatment we have been giving the last 100 to 150 years has been counterproductive. It has made people who are suffering from disease even sicker, because taking away the disturbances, the illnesses, doing too much vaccination, for instance, will make the whole system utterly weak in the end. And this is the cause of so many diseases today. We're just scratching on the surface. But what we know today is the autoimmune diseases like allergy, asthma, arthrosis, which affect the knee joints and the hips. Those are autoimmune. And also multiple sclerosis, MS, which affect the neuromuscular system, and some other diseases. But we are now starting to understand that also diseases of the brain body system like Alzheimer and pre-onset of dementia, which is coming increasingly common today, is probably caused by us not having enough resistance or disturbances. We have to remember, during the 20th century in Sweden, we didn't have a single war. We had just one small famine, which was in the beginning of last century, and nobody died from it. We had had two major epidemics, but they were both in the early part of the century. One was, of course, the Spanish flu that killed, I think, about 350,000 in Sweden. Since then, nothing has happened when it comes to disturbances or attacks on the human body and the human soul. We need these attacks because these are the material that make a plant strong. This can be easily shown in a laboratory. If you take away the disturbances from a single insect like the banana fly, I haven't seen any banana flies here in the palm house, but I'm sure they exist. We have them at home. But if you take away bacteria from the banana fly, if you take away microbes like viruses and amoebas, it will die within 3 generations. It must certainly die. Although those microbes can kill the banana fly, it will also help them. And what are we doing today? We are vaccinating for everything. I myself have received over 20 vaccinations in my lifetime. Some of them were for diseases very severe, like smallpox and polio, but some were for diseases who are not that severe, like, let's see here, COVID. I think COVID is a good example. COVID is a non-serious disease. It does not kill off a lot of people. I think to this date, about 20 to 25,000 people died in Sweden, not more. It sounds like a big sum, but compare that to the 350,000 in last century with the Spanish flu. That is a proper disease. That is something to be afraid of. But 20 to 25,000, That, I would say, is a necessary illness to have in the society to keep it healthy. Because we know resilience can only come from attacks. Otherwise, you cannot internally produce resilience to diseases. And oddly enough, this also goes for the mental system, our psychology. And what has been typical in the last century, especially in Sweden and I would say the Nordic countries, is the treatment of school children in the schools. I am 56 years old now, currently, but when I was young, it was still somewhat common to slap students or pupils if they didn't behave. But to be honest, it only happened to me twice, I think, during 9 years. That used to be common when you were younger. And in some society, for instance, Greece, it is still common to this day. I listened to a friend of mine. He mentioned that when he was very young, he was constantly pestering his fellow students, his fellow pupils. He was attacking them. He was dragging the small girls by their hair, and she was teasing them. Finally, the professor or the teacher, he had enough, and he took him by the ears and he lifted him. And I would think, even for me, being 56, that would be something I never forgot. But he forgot about it within a week. And you can imagine the pain, being lifted in your ears. And I think that goes to show that resilience is disappearing now. And we are affecting our own children, our own pupils by this. We are doing the same thing as they do in the laboratory to the banana flies. We're taking away the bacteria, we're taking away dirt, we're taking away the viruses, we're taking away other microorganisms, and we create an environment that is completely sterile. And that environment is momentarily very helpful for the banana fly, because it won't catch like a flu or cold. Nothing would kill it, you think, but give it 2 to 3 generations, they will all die, because the lack of resilience comes almost immediately, because there is no pressure on the system. It is the pressure that makes resilience. I am not suggesting now we should take all the pressure at once. I don't think a full-blown war with some other nations would be a good thing, or a big famine or a plague. I don't think those things would help. But we need, a little by little, get some more stimulations to us. And I think when we have a system that sort of supports our stability. One instance I mentioned before was the rhythms, the repetitions we can do in our head. And this was previously done by monks in France, Belgium, the Netherlands, southern Netherlands. I was actually in contact the other day with Jan, a friend of mine, who grew up in a Jesuit school. It was quite hard. But he mentioned what made the monks survive, or the priests survive, was the constant chanting. We know a chanting or verses that are repeated constantly act like a strange attractor. And for you who forgot what a strange attractor is, a strange attractor is what keeps this plant together. It's one single direction. We have been aware of strange attractor for nearly 50 years. It was discovered by Benoit Mandelbrot. This is what makes every living system strong. It is also the thing that makes our own galaxy, the Milky Way, persist forever. It's been going on for 100 billion years. This is the true force of the universe, not the laws of Newton, not the laws of Einstein, but the chaotic system and the strange attractor. The strange attractor means that all disturbances that come into the chaotic system makes the chaotic system stronger. A very common example I usually take up is if you go around a stream, like a flood or an å, Swedish, then you will see a whirlwind like this. And this whirlwind is a chaotic system, and it constantly shows out the same patterns, going round and round and round. Those patterns, if you throw in a rock into it, or rain starts to fall, or there is a flood in the river, those patterns will remain. Actually, the disturbances you put into the whirlwind will make it stronger. This goes for the plant, this also goes for the Milky Way, it goes for our present planet, the Earth, and it also goes for us. And we need this strange attractor. And in the monasteries previously, before the Second Vatican Concilium, is it called in English? All monks in all monasteries, they were allowed to chant at least 4 to 5 hours a day. They were reciting, they were singing, they were also choring. And they did this repeatedly. We now know that is a strange attractor. That means that all the disturbances they had, and they had a lot, one of them being they didn't get enough food, they could not sleep enough, they were only allowed to sleep 5 to 6 hours a day, which is way too little. There were also other things. The beds they are incredibly uncomfortable. I've been sleeping in one of those beds once only. It is completely hard. You don't even have a bed sheet to put on you. And you sleep usually on a piece of log over your head. So the circumstances inside the monastery, especially in the tougher orders, is very hard. The Second Vatican Concilium didn't understand this. They didn't understand resilience. They did not believe in permanence. It was actually mentioned in the conciliums, permanence can't be a thing of the world. Everything is impermanent. Nothing can subsist. So they intentionally took away liturgy in the monasteries. And it took only, in the same example as with the mice and with banana flies, it took 6 to 7 months until the first diseases started to occur in the monasteries. Within a year, there were full-blown deaths. They started to die. They stranded down into depressions. Somebody got schizophrenia. They got all kinds of diseases, also diseases of the body, horrible diseases of the body, both infections and structural diseases like rheumatism and something. The Count, they made a big investigations in the early 70s. It could have been up to 20,000 monks that suffered from this change. And it was like they didn't want permanence to exist, because you get permanent if you have a strange attractor. By taking away that, they thought they could create impermanence. I think, no, we're going to take away the soul. We're going to take away anything that can persist. And in the end, it was actually the newspapers and the health authorities that forced the Catholic Church to start with a voluntary liturgy and save those poor souls that were still alive. But it was a huge blow to the monasteries. When I spoke to Jan, he was looking at the curve of monasteries in Belgium, which is very pious, was very pious in the 50s. That means a lot of people went to the churches and the monasteries. It went down to 1/3. So 2/3 were taken away. And that was intentional. We have to remember that. It was not a mistake. It was the defilement of permanence, true permanence, that things actually exist almost forever. And I would say this palm tree, even though it looks like it's shielded, it is not shielded. Because of the structure of the palm house, the poor palm have to suffer things not even the African palm have to suffer. And do you know what that is? That is coldness. it doesn't isolate it from 10 to 15 minus. So this palm tree has been suffering things no palm tree in Africa or the Arab Peninsula have to suffer. And also humidity. Humidity to a much greater level than any palm tree has to suffer. Because underneath the ceiling we have moisture, dewdrops. And those dewdrops have been falling on the poor palm tree for at least 140 years. And this is what build up the permanence of the palm tree, is those things. And I would say also the constant locomotion with people here. Most trees don't appreciate too much locomotion because it creates a stir. But in a good portion, if it's not too much, it could actually help the tree or the palm. And it does also help human beings. So it's a lot about the level. Of course, if we were to take away all the walls here, the tree would die, because we have down to 20 minus in Sweden. That would be too extreme. So the idea of creating resilience is do it little by little. And what they did in the monasteries, they were building up resilience, because they did it both body and soul. Jan told me he saw the monks before 1961, and they were walking around like this. They looked like strong people. And he said he often confused them with military people or policemen because they looked so strong. And he even showed me a photo how they looked afterwards. They looked like this. They took away what made them permanent. They took away the most important thing of the monastery, the very religion or the link to something higher spiritual. That was taken away, and they suffered almost immediately. In Belgium, even a word was invented, kraakhank, and it means a person who lost everything. And that was used when they were referring to monks and priests after 1961. So the change was immensely, maybe the biggest change that ever happened to any church, ever. And it shows that we know resilience. We've been knowing that for 1500 years. The Catholic Church is a very old thing. It would even been 1900 years. So we've been using this liturgy to have permanence, to make ourselves stronger, because if you have one strange attractor, your body will become more complex. For every new disturbing thought you have, you can imagine those monks not sleeping much, sleeping only 5 hours. I haven't slept much tonight. And what I have today, it's a lot of disturbing thoughts. I think terror, and it's almost like, shameful to describe, like having nightmares. No, not so bad as your nightmare, but still some nightmares. And I'm shaking from lack of sleep. But if I think permanently on my rhythm, I have a rhythm in my head, I have 33 verses that I constantly repeat inside my head, almost like a liturgy. And I do this constantly. And just doing that makes me stronger. So I even get stronger than I was yesterday when I had a good 7 hours sleep and good food. I haven't even eaten today, bar the chocolate I had here. So those things doesn't make me weaker. But it's all about measure. If you take too much, it will kill you off. And I often compare this to chemotherapy. I don't know if you know, familiar with chemotherapy?
A little bit.
It is what you give a cancer patient. Chemotherapy is actually sort of poison. It is a poison. You give it to the person, and it actually attacks every living cell in the body. Brain cells, skin cells, nerve cells, everything gets attacked. So it's not directed especially to the cancer cells. But the idea is to kill off so much, so in the same killing, we also kill off the cancer cells. That's the idea. And that usually works. I think it works in 85% of the cases. This is a figure I heard recently. And that's extraordinary. Can you imagine you give poison to a person who's sick. How could that work? It works through chaotic system. It works through resilience. Because once the cancer cells are dead, or we assume them to be dead, and you take away the poison, the person almost immediately regain his or her resilience. And when the resilience comes back, that extra strength will kill off the last of the cancer cells. This is our own immune system kicking in, and it kicks in decisively. Sometimes you just get shocked. I have a friend of mine who's a cancer doctor called Kaya, and he showed me example. He had to show me like photos, like x-rays, and I couldn't believe it. It was like huge cancer cells like this, and the person, he got radiation as well, not only chemotherapy. But what happened, it was this big, take away the drug, and it takes 3 weeks, and the last thing is gone. And it's gone all through the body. And what you do, you kickstart the immune system, you kickstart all the resilience that is left in the body. And in the end, all single cancer cells are killed. That is a strange attractor. But an important thing for the treatment to work is that you are self-directed to take the treatment. I had a relative of me, she was very old. She didn't want the treatment, she got it anyway, and she died. It is very important to have the direction. Your active participation is important. And I would say that the palm tree we mentioned before, it has a direction. It has an intention to survive. And I think that intention is actually part of the universe. And this is going to sound astonishing. This is a theory I have. I would say that even the Milky Way, Vintergatan, it has a willingness to survive. I think that's built into the universe. Because the strange attractor is the will to be persistent, to exist from moment to moment to moment to moment. And I would say, once we harvest this, once we start to understand this magnificent power, I would think that there is no limit for what we can do. Actually, this very structure is a chaotic structure. Before the 18th century, 100 years before this was built, people could not build these structures. They would say to people, no, that would fall together. Look at it. It is very thin. It doesn't have these supporting things you find in, for instance, not the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. At that time, we thought we have to build very, very heavy, very dense to make it last. Somewhere we started to realize that the outside force, the wind, gravitation, and the actual weight of the building could actually help. So Notre Dame in Paris is built in the way of you stapling things on top of each other to make it stronger. The heavier, the stronger. This structure, on the other hand, is thinking we use the weight of the structure to make it stronger. This is the same way, for instance, the globe in Stockholm is built. It is not, it doesn't have much material to it. And if we would have shown that to a person from the 18th century, he would say, oh no, that structure would never hold. But it does. And thanks to the globe taking the pressure from the air around it, the weight of its own structure into the system, it becomes almost like a chaotic system. And to this day, it is actually the case. If you want to destroy the globe in Stockholm, you would have to put much more force than you would to, for instance, trying to destroy Notre Dame in Paris. It would take much more energy to take away the globe. And I think the globe weighs about 100 part, 1% of Notre Dame. It is not very heavy. because it uses all its weight to become more stable. We human beings are the same. When I stand here talk to you, my first instinct is to take away what I have behind me and take away what I have above me. In the idea, it's going to be more Hans Johansson, standing here, concentrating on what am I supposed to say. Maybe a bit nervous because my dear friend Naomi is here as well. And instead, I was thinking, why not take in the disturbances? The group who's standing next to me, who's talking too loud and everything, that could actually help. These things are for me now not something that disturbs. It makes the whole thing stronger. And I actually remember something remarkable. Many years ago, I was in India, 2006, and I got very sick. The last couple of months I stayed in a place called Mysore in southern India. And in this town of Mysore, there were a lot of yogis. This is the center of yoga in the world. But one thing that amazed me was that these yogis, well, the most amazing thing was they could actually almost stop their hearts. I felt one yogi, I took his wrist and I felt his pulse. And he said, my pulse is going from 50 to 4. And I said, that won't happen. At 4, you will be gone. You would faint or something. You would go into unconsciousness and regain the breath. He was not kidding. He took his pulse down to 40, he took it down to 30, he took it down to 20, then I started to get scared. And he said, don't be scared, my friend, I'm still alive. Then he took it down to 10, and then he took it down to 5. I couldn't believe my own hand, but I felt it. And to this very day, I will not forget it. This is permanence. This is a person who understands resilience. If your heart only goes 5 times a minute, that's not enough to pump enough oxygen to support your brain. He should have gone into unconsciousness, and in unconsciousness he would start to breathe again, of course, which you do if you faint. That's why you faint. If I stand here too long, I will faint. My body will lie on the floor and I will start to breathe again. That's the idea of fainting. He did not faint. He was standing. But one thing I also noticed, there could be yogis out in the street among cows, dogs, cars blowing their horns, boop, 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 boop. Street vendors selling their bananas, catch the banana, catch the banana. As an enormous amount of disturbances. And I got a nervous breakdown just by standing there. And what do I see? I saw in the coffee shop, I saw students studying for their exams. And I was wondering, how on earth is that possible? With all these toot, and even car accidents and people screaming as they often do in India. And then I saw the thing that amazed me the most. A little group of yogis are like gurus, sitting by the roadside, doing meditation. They could meditate. I could never ever do that. I could barely meditate at home. As soon as I hear something noise like a vent or somebody walking the staircase, and trust me, my apartment is pretty well insulated. You only hear this. That's enough to disturb me. So my focus resilience is close to nothing compared to those people. And imagine the other defects Western students or pupils have, like ADHD, ADHD, lack of focus, which is staggering, coming up with 15% a year. It's becoming 15% more common every year in the Swedish school system. That means that you cannot focus even if you have calm around you. Other thing like dyslexia is coming up as well. We think dyslexia is a matter of lack of focus on a very small level. It is established already when you are 5 or 6 years old. I would say that's terrible. They would terribly lose your focus, your awareness, your direction already at that age. And the Swedish schooling system is calm. There's no disturbances. There's no blowing horns on the cars. There's no cows walking around. Actually, when I saw the yogis, it was especially the cows I was thinking of, because they can push you, or they can do anything with you. That would make me never want to meditate on a street in India. They had no problems with whatever. And it seemed that both the cows and the dogs ignore the yogis for some odd reasons. I don't know why. They didn't even touch their food. But I think that goes to show, once you get this resilience, this presence, it is like the disturbances don't affect you anymore. It is like the disturbances make you stronger. And I also think about this expression in Sweden, masculine barn, the dandelion child. Dandelion child means a young child who grows up in a family which is completely, wrecked. Maybe the father is an alcoholic and the mom is an abuser of drugs, and the child doesn't get much care. In some few cases, not all cases, the child grew up to be even stronger than his classmates. It is very odd, and of course it's not something I recommend, but those things happen. And I always wonder to myself, I have actually a friend who has who is one of those dandelion childs.
Oh my God!
His mother was a schizophrenic, and she used to give the children sawdust, like from woods, and water. She thought that was cornflakes, so she was that mentally disturbed. At that time, it was in the mid-70s, the authorities recommended that him, my friend, and his sister to be replaced. They were replaced to foster parents, but really bad luck. In the foster parents, they were mistreated. Especially in those times, you were paid a lot of money. You got 2,500 crowns in the 70s for each child. That was a lot of money. So people who took these places usually misused their position. They didn't give enough food to the kids. They didn't give them any love. They didn't get any hugs. My friend, you remember, the mother in the family called all the children to come to the table for something to drink. And the normal children, her own children, were given juice and he got water. It's terrible. And that was his childhood. But he managed to survive these really horrible circumstances. And I would say those circumstances was even worse than India. And even in India, maybe you don't get enough food. You still get the love of your parents. Somebody to take care of you. Somebody who gives your heart to you. And that's very important, otherwise you don't grow up fine. Oddly enough, my friend, he still grew up to be a good father. He has a family today. He has a good job working in the communality or municipality of Gothenburg. So he survived. The only thing I didn't like with the whole story was that he put a dandelion on his underarm to show that he was a dandelion child. I didn't like the tattoo, but of course I can understand it to some extent. He wants to show that he was a survivor. But I think that goes to show for resilience. I was lucky enough to have two loving parents. They brought me up well, they fed me well. They always was there for me if I wanted something. But sometimes I wonder, maybe if I had some more adversities, maybe I would have gotten stronger. You don't know. But during one's life, one meets a lot of obstacles, hindrances. And it seems for every time you are at a certain level and you conquer that thing, and it's something awful. For instance, in my case was in India, I almost died from starvation. I was so sick from a stomach disease. After that, I somehow got stronger. It's like the body recuperated. And actually, since 2006, I haven't had one singular stomach disease. And trust me, I've been eating, after the first 3 years when I realized I couldn't get sick, I've been eating things that could make you sick. And I even went to a party 5 years ago, and it was like 80% of the party goers, they got salmonella. It was a catering firm here in Gothenburg that made a mistake. I didn't get it. So I think some resilience has come to me. But I would not recommend this method. It almost killed me. That's going too far. My point is, maybe a little bit could help. Don't throw yourself into the canal around this nice park. That is way too dirty. That could actually kill you off. But a little resistance. And also try to, for instance, one thing that we Swedish people have a great problem with is meeting new people. We don't know. Try to meet new people. That would test your resilience. It would make you stronger. And I think, Naomi, you're a very good example of that, because you're not afraid of anyone. Because you train that, you become resilient. And you have to know, sometimes when you talk to people, you're going to get a bad response. But that's part of it. I think sometimes I want to say something to someone, and I see that person is probably bad. I want to talk to that person. This is making my resilience weaker. And I'm trying to challenge me on that. And I did that the other day. And actually the person I spoke to, he looked like really a bad guy. He turned out to be very friendly. But this is how we progress. We challenge ourselves. We do challenges. We take the possibility of developing. And for every time you do that, you get stronger actually. Just like the plant. You can finish off the whole thing by showing the plant once more, Kalle. This is the symbol of strength, which is beyond belief. 140 years old. Still surviving to this day in the Palm House in Gothenburg. Do come to visit. Thank you very much.
Thank you.